talking defense. We're talking about many things. We have a tremendous trade imbalance, but we're going to get that straightened out. It'll be better and better, I think, as time goes by. Our military relationship is very good. I think we all understand each other. And it's an honor to be with the Chancellor. She's done an incredible job, highly respected by everybody, including me. So I just want to say it's a great honor, Angela. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Ja, ich freue mich auch, dass wir die Möglichkeit zu diesem bilateralen Gespräch haben. Wir werden über Handelsfragen sprechen, über multilaterale Fragen, fairen Handel, Welthandelsorganisation. Wir werden über die bilateralen Beziehungen sprechen, über Ukraine, wahrscheinlich Syrien und auch den INF-Vertrag, der durch Russland ja verletzt wird. Also für die kurze Zeit viel zu tun. Danke für die Möglichkeit.
And you just heard remarks from President Trump while meeting with the German Chancellor, and we are waiting to see if he weighs in on the death of President George Herbert Walker Bush. We do expect reporters to ask the two leaders some questions. It's a chance for him to make his first public remarks after praising him overnight as successful and having a beautiful life. Let's listen again.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.
Mr. President, have you spoken to President George W. Bush?
Yes, I have, and Jeb also. And I expressed deepest sympathies. Angela and I were just talking about it. He was a wonderful man. And you may want to just explain your little meeting with him. I found it very interesting.
Yes, I was with Chancellor Kohl in the White House visiting George Bush, and he is the father, or one of the fathers of the German unification, and we will never forget that.
I found that very interesting. So we extended our best wishes, and he was a very fine man. I met him on numerous occasions. He was just a high-quality man who truly loved his family. One thing that came through loud and clear, he was very proud of his family and very much loved his family. So he was a terrific guy, and he'll be missed, and he led a full life and a very exemplary life, too, I will say. And we've decided, as you know, we're going to have a big press conference today, which I actually look forward to because we've made tremendous progress at the G20 with many nations. And we were going to have a very big press conference, and out of respect for President Bush, we've canceled it here, and we'll have it back in Washington at some time in the near future, sometime after the funeral services. Okay?
Do you regret any of your comments about Bush or his family in the past?
Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you. Thank you very much.
With President Xi tonight?
We will be meeting with President Xi tonight. I will be, and my group, small group, and he will have a small group of representatives, and we'll be talking about a thing called trade, and probably other things also, but primarily trade, and it's a very important meeting. But again, the fact that we lost a president who truly was a wonderful person, a wonderful man, a great man, it really puts a damper on it, to be honest with you. So we're going to have the meeting tonight, and then I'll be going back to Washington, and we can all meet sometime during the week or shortly thereafter. Thank you all very much. Thank you. Thank you.
And there you just heard President Trump making his first public comments about the passing of former President George Herbert Walker Bush there during his bilateral meeting with German Chancellor Angela Merkel, who also weighed in on the passing. She referenced the former president as one of the fathers of German unification. President Trump praising him as a very fine man, saying he will be missed. He lived a full and exemplary life, also talking about the fact that he canceled a planned press conference out of respect for the Bush family. I want to go to my colleague, Hallie Jackson, who's traveling with the president in Buenos Aires. Hallie, obviously there were tensions between the Trump and Bush families, but President Trump putting those aside today.
And not answering a question, Kristen, regarding whether he regrets some of his past comments about former President Bush. And just to give a sense of what those comments were, remember, this was a relationship that was fraught. There was a book, of course, that President Bush wrote in which he called President Trump a blowhard, said he didn't vote for him in 2016. As recently as his presidency, President Trump cast doubt on the meaning of 1,000 points of light, that critical phrase, that sort of use that George Bush had, George Herbert Walker Bush, to talk about his service, to talk about his community to this country. President Trump saying, what does that even mean? Now, notably, that phrase, 1,000 points of light, was in the statement that the president and First Lady put out in the wee hours of the morning here in Argentina, honoring and remembering the life and legacy of service of President Bush. But you did hear the president now, for the first time on camera, address directly the death of President Bush. Just to give a sense of the timeline here, we do know that the president has declared Wednesday a national day of mourning in D.C. He will be attending services for President Bush. Those are expected to be that funeral at the National Cathedral in Washington, a state funeral, the White House says, with all that accompanies that, Kristen, all the pomp and circumstance to pay respect to this leader, this former president here. So President Trump not wading into some of those disagreements that he has had with President Bush, but instead choosing to take this moment to remember, when prompted, when asked by members of the press who were in the room, to remember and honor President Bush. And notable that he talked about his family, too, saying it was very clear in his conversations both with George W. Bush and with Jeb Bush. Kristen, we learned that the president spoke with Jeb Bush, his former Republican primary opponent, remember, back in 2015 and the early days of 2016, that, in fact, family was so important to President Bush, and that is a way that he wants to be remembered. You know the love story between President Bush and his late wife, Barbara, and lots of remembrances to come over the next several days. We'll get another opportunity to hear from the president later on tonight, Kristen, when he holds that bilateral meeting, that dinner with Chinese President Xi Jinping. That will mostly focus on trade, but we'll see what else the president has to say after he did call off that press conference, as he noted there, out of respect to the Bush family. Kristen?
And I know you'll be tracking that dinner very closely, Hallie. I want to turn to my colleague, NBC's Garrett Hake, who's live in Houston. Garrett, Hallie talked about a little bit of what we can expect in these coming days. Set the scene there in Texas. Obviously, a day of mourning for the country, but particularly for those there in Texas. And what are we expecting over the next week, Garrett?
Kristen, this is the president's adopted home state, his adopted home city. He's been a fixture in Houston, Texas, ever since leaving the White House, coming back here in 1993. Beloved in this city, like the rest of the country, waking up and learning about this news today, a sense of mourning around Texas in particular. Hallie started to lay out this sort of state funeral process, the details of timing of which are still being nailed down, but will happen in three parts. You'll have the Washington portion of this, in which the former president will lie in state in the Capitol. We'll have that funeral ceremony at the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C. And then the remains of the former president will come back here to Texas, where he'll have a separate funeral service at St. Martin's Church here in Houston, the same church where the former First Lady, Barbara Bush, was honored after she passed away earlier this year. And then the former president will be laid to rest at Texas A&M University, College Station, Texas, about 100 miles from Houston. That's where his presidential library is. And again, he'll be reunited with his wife, Barbara, there, laid to rest at the conclusion of this multi-part, potentially week-long remembrance and process here around the state funeral. Again, the details and timing of which all still being worked out between the government and the Bush family, Kristen.
And it is, in fact, a day and week of mourning for this country. Garrett Hake, thank you for that. Hallie Jackson, thank you as well. Once again, President George H.W. Bush died last night in Houston at the age of 94. The body of the 41st president will be brought to Washington next week and will lie in state in the Capitol Rotunda before funeral services are held later in the week. We will continue to monitor developments throughout the day, including Hallie Jackson in Buenos Aires, and come back on the air as events warrant. And Lester Holt will have a full report tonight on NBC Nightly News. For now, I'm Kristen Welker, NBC News, Washington.